from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, attorney Dan Lennington. Good morning, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Meg.
Well, I appreciate you taking some time out of your morning to, let's start by help me remember, you used to work for the Attorney General. Is that correct?
Yes, I work for Brad Schimmel and J.B. Van Hollen. I've prosecuted cases for the states and actually done a lot of work in the Milwaukee County Courthouse prosecuting white-collar crimes. I've also, before that, I was a federal prosecutor and prosecuted illegal aliens. I used to work with ICE quite a bit and work on the removal and prosecution and sentencing of illegal immigrants, actually under the Obama administration, of all administrations, and they were quite aggressive back then. And this guy we're going to talk about today, Eduardo Flores Ruiz, actually was deported back in 2013 by the Obama administration, and now he's back. Now he's back for more shenanigans in Wisconsin.
So walk us through his crime and why he was at the courthouse, and who all was involved in this, and just as you understand the facts that were presented.
Yeah, as I said, he was deported by the ICE, the U.S. government, to Mexico in 2013. When you're deported, they take your fingerprints and they put it in something called an A file, and that is also uploaded to a federal database of fingerprints, so that if your fingerprints ever show up again, ICE knows about it, knows where you are, and can try to get you and deport you again. And so on April 18th, Flores Ruiz, the illegal immigrant, was required to appear in Milwaukee County Court on charges unrelated to his immigration status, but related to the fact that he was charged with 3 counts of domestic battery. He had allegedly beat up 2 people, a man and a woman, putting them in the hospital. He was arrested for that, booked. His fingerprints were taken. And he's required to appear in court. And so when his fingerprints were taken by Milwaukee County during his arrest, those were cross-matched with the ICE database, and ICE was alerted that Flores Ruiz was going to be in the courthouse on Friday, April 18th at 8:30 a.m. Now, this is very common to arrest people on charges inside of a courthouse, and if you think about it, you'll probably come to the same conclusion that if you're a law enforcement officer, arresting somebody in the courthouse is probably the best circumstances you could have, because there's no weapons allowed in a courthouse. People have gone through a metal detector, definitely in Milwaukee County. There's lots of law enforcement officers around. It's a controlled environment. You know where things are, and if you're an officer, that when you arrest someone, the first thing you want to make sure you're doing is that your own safety is protected. And so, Flores Ruiz was going to be arrested that day following his hearing in front of Judge Hannah Dugan on those counts of domestic battery. Now, the ICE agents, followed all the protocol. They went to the courthouse early. They checked in with the court service officers. They checked in with the Milwaukee County Sheriff. They said, "We are federal officers. We are here to arrest an illegal alien. The alien has a hearing in front of Judge Dugan." They actually went to the court, the office, the clerk who was in charge of Judge Dugan's court, and explained to them that this was going to happen. Everybody in the courthouse knew this was going to happen, because, as I said, it's actually quite common for this to happen. The only sort of proviso that was put on these officers is that the court requested that the hearing be for domestic battery be allowed to proceed, and that they arrest him after the hearing, which is very standard. The victims of Flores Ruiz's crime were in the courtroom. They were waiting for their justice, and so you didn't want to interfere with that. So they made all this agreement, and they sat out in the hallway and waited, and Flores Ruiz was in the courtroom. And then what happened next is what has been the subject of national and now international controversy. A defense attorney had spotted the ICE agents sitting out in the hallway in plain clothes, went into the courtroom, asked Judge Dugan for a sidebar, and informed Judge Dugan that ICE was outside. And Judge Dugan visibly became very angry, said into the microphone that this was absurd. She told Flores Ruiz, the illegal immigrant, to come sit in the jury box, which is a separate area reserved for the jury and for sometimes court officers, but never for a defendant. And then Judge Dugan walked out in the hallway in her robes, confronted the ICE agents, yelled at them, said they had no right to be there, became visibly angry. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, told Fox News that the judge screamed at the ICE officials. What we know next is that she commanded them to leave the courthouse, and then the agents produced a warrant and said, actually, we are here to arrest the defendant who's sitting in your courtroom right now. And she said, no, well, you can't do that. You have to go down and talk to the chief judge of Milwaukee County. So Judge Dugan escorted these ICE agents, physically escorted them down the hall, through a series of double doors, back into the court chief judge's vestibule, and back to a private area, and said, you need to wait here and talk to the chief judge. Turns out the chief judge was probably not even there, but while the ICE agents were there occupied in the chief judge's chambers, Judge Dugan went back to her own courtroom and called up Flores Ruiz's attorney to the sidebar again, and then called up Flores Ruiz, and then she personally escorted Flores Ruiz, the illegal alien, and his attorney through the jury door into a non-public area of her chambers, into a non-public corridor, back out into a hallway and to an elevator bank that was the farthest away that could be from her courtroom, and escorted him down the elevator. He was released then out onto the sidewalk. He proceeded down the sidewalk. Other ICE agents who happened to be outside spotted him, and Flores Ruiz then started to run down the sidewalk, causing the agents then to run after him, tackled him, apprehended him, and arrested him on the sidewalk outside of the Milwaukee County Courthouse. Now, this all in opposition to what was supposed to happen, is that this illegal alien was supposed to be arrested after he stood in front of the judge and in front of his victims in the other case, and took part in a pretrial conference in that case, that he would be arrested in the hallway like a normal person would be arrested in the hallway who is facing charges for another crime. So that's what happened on April 18th, Friday, April 18th, according to the FBI, which filed a criminal complaint against Hannah Dugan.
So I talked with State Representative Jim Pivovarczyk this morning, and he suggested there are some questions about whether or not Judge Hannah Dugan was in violation of Marsy's Law. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think that whether she did or not, that's the least of her problems. But yes, Marsy's Law is a constitutional amendment that provides protection and due process to the victims of crimes. And I was involved in part of the passage and drafting of Marsy's Law. I don't think when anybody was writing or drafting that, they had in their mind the idea that a judge might actually help a defendant be spirited away through from a courtroom to avoid actually facing justice and getting victims put in the proper place of getting the justice that they deserve. So this is quite an unusual circumstance, but I would absolutely not be surprised if it was later found out that her actions did did violate Marcy's law. But as I said, that is a remedy that the victims could bring up in their own case, and they could receive justice based on that. But that would be a violation by Judge Dugan as a judge, and would not be any personal liability to her. When a judge violates a procedure like that, or a state law or state constitution, another judge would hold them accountable and issue an order, but it would not, personally cause some sort of jeopardy to Hannah Dugan as an individual, but rather as a judge. Now these charges that were filed, that is a completely different case. Those are federal obstruction of justice charges and concealing a federal fugitive charges, which will impact her in her personal life. And in fact, she was arrested on Friday and taken into custody and booked and arraigned in federal court in the Milwaukee County Federal Court, or the Milwaukee Federal Courthouse.
So I asked you this off air in order to prepare you, but I mean, you can just say specifically what you said to me about how, what on earth was this judge thinking? I mean, obviously you can't, you weren't there, or you don't know the condition of her mind, but what on earth would possess her to do this, knowing that she's jeopardizing her career and her freedom?
I don't know. I know that there is among people who are on the left and who oppose what President Trump is doing. His immigration policy, as just one example, it invokes some sort of extreme personal reaction among people, where some people feel like that his immigration policy is sort of akin to maybe Nazi Germany. There were posts online about how Judge Dugan was arrested in the same way that Anne Frank was arrested by the Nazis. We have another judge in Wisconsin said that ICE is taking illegal immigrants to concentration camps. And so this sort of fits in the box of Trump is Hitler. Okay, so I mean, we sort of joke, like people say, like Trump is Hitler, but no, there are people who are saying Trump is doing Hitler-like things and acting as an authoritarian, and that word is thrown out quite a bit by the left. And the logical conclusion of that is that if this is true, if we're actually living in this Nazi-like regime, then you actually can be a hero to stand up to this regime and to do things to prevent them from taking people to, quote, concentration camps. Because that's what we would hope, what we would all have done had we been in Germany in the 1930s and 1940s. So that's the frame of mind that I can only speculate as to. And the New York Times columnist David Brooks over the weekend said that Judge Dugan was acting heroically.
Oh my gosh!
And so I think if you're in that state of mind, if you have deluded yourself to the fact that you think that we are literally living in a Nazi regime, then the only sane thing to do, if you believe that, is to actually resist and to use the power of your office to resist. Whether you're a judge, and you've got an illegal immigrant in your courtroom, or whether you're, Tony Evers sending out memos to state employees telling them likewise to resist the Trump administration, or you're the Attorney General of Wisconsin, who I'm sure is going to probably take some action very soon about resisting President Trump. And now these are all like extrajudicial actions. These are you can certainly oppose President Trump in a lawful manner. You can protest against him. You can be upset with him. You can write op-eds. You can do all sorts of things. You can pass legislation. You can sue him. You can sue the president. You can sue his officials. You can try to get court orders. But the idea that you're just going to just stop following the rules that we have in this country, like criminal defendants should go through hearings in courtrooms that have been scheduled, that arrest warrants mean something, that federal officials have the supreme authority under the Constitution to arrest people inside of courthouses, that victims of crimes deserve to get a day in court, that you should just throw all that away and you should just flush it down the toilet because Trump is Hitler. That if I had to speculate and say where is this coming from, that's my best guess, and I'm happy to hear people disagree with that, but that's all I can come up with.
All right, so in our remaining time, I'll just comment briefly. Imagine if this had gone on during the Biden administration, if there were judges that were unwilling to acknowledge that I don't know if Biden even enforced any laws, so it wouldn't have mattered. But just in summary, what do you believe is going to happen to this Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan? Do you believe that she will lose her job and there will be significant consequences for her actions?
Very significant. I've prosecuted federal crimes for many years. I've never seen a federal criminal case that was sort of not a big deal. People say, don't make a federal case out of it. The reason people say that because it's a serious business when there is a federal case. So this is a federal criminal charge of obstruction or impeding an agency of the United States and concealing an individual to prevent his discovery and arrest. The federal sentencing guidelines, which are advisory, but judges and prosecutors take them seriously, calls for, in some cases, depending on how you count it, between 8 and 14 months of confinement in federal prison, or 21 to 27 months of confinement in federal prison, depending on how these are calculated and whether she pleads guilty or not. If she pleads guilty, and she will go up in front of the court and she will have to answer what's called a colloquy, which is a discussion between the prosecutor and her in open court. Well, she will admit all of the elements of the crime and all the facts of her crime, which she will admit in open court. And that is the most likely outcome, because if she does plead guilty and is convicted that way, her sentence will probably just be probation, but probation and supervision by the U.S. Probation Office is not a cakewalk either, and that would probably last at least 12 months. So my best guess is that she pleads guilty, she admits to what she did, she gets 12 months probation, she has a federal conviction on her record, a permanent federal conviction. Whether the voters of Milwaukee County want to recall her or whether she's somehow ineligible to be a judge because of that conviction, I haven't looked into that yet. But if she does want to fight this, she can go to trial and contest all these allegations. But if you're convicted after trial, your sentence is much more likely to be harsher and would much more likely include confinement in federal prison. And so her best case scenario is that she pleads guilty as quickly as possible and cooperates. The federal government may also be interested to know whether other people were involved in this. This apparently was a conspiracy, which is an agreement of 2 or more people to commit federal law violations. And so it could be that she had agreements with other people inside the building or outside the building to obstruct ICE officers. And if that's the case, a federal Department of Justice may be interested to explore that, which they can do through the grand jury process, which will probably start this week and will involve a formal indictment of Judge Hannah Dugan, perhaps on more or additional charges. So we should be hearing more this week or next week about her indictment. If it goes on farther, it could mean that there's a broader investigation going on by the federal government. But at some point, she will, in my view, be held guilty, be convicted, and be sentenced by a federal court.
Well, and I mean, not to take her side, but she was encouraged to participate in this type of behavior by our own governor. I mean, who issued that memo stating that state employees should not comply with ICE agents, correct?
Yes, there was a memo that went out from the Evers administration, and it says what it says. I don't want to comment really about that memo, but I think that was very poor judgment by the governor, and does seem to indicate to me that was broad agreement among lots of people in the state about, in general, obstructing ICE and the arrest of illegal immigrants. And if you are a big, state like Wisconsin and you get lots of money from the federal government with lots of strings attached, I think you would probably not want to publicize your plan to obstruct federal enforcement of its own laws, because it might, put your own money at risk that you're getting. It might have other consequences. It might entail personal liability for people, depending on what they did, what they intended, and the acts they took. But it's not. I mean, if the cops are going to arrest somebody, I would just recommend to everybody, you should get out of the way. You should let if the cops have an arrest warrant, you should let them do their job. And that's the rule of law. That's the process we have in this country. And if we start allowing people or encouraging people to get in the way of the arrest of others, that's really going to be a breakdown in our criminal justice system. And I don't think anybody is going to enjoy living in that type of world.
Dan Ledington from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, thank you for your expertise this morning. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. All right.